And the subject of my investigation, the death of Anna Kepner, an 18-year-old killed while on board a cruise ship with her blended family. Here's the story.
Anna Kepner was a bright young woman with her whole life ahead of her. But one night, everything changed. When investigators arrived, they were told a story that didn't add up. Her belongings were neatly arranged. A broken window hinted at forced entry, yet no footprints or fingerprints matched an intruder. Her stepbrother claimed he was asleep upstairs the entire night, but inconsistencies in his timeline and deleted messages painted a different picture. Now, months later, new evidence has emerged, pieces of a puzzle that could finally reveal what really happened. Could the person closest to Anna be hiding the truth?
In this case, the named suspect has been this 16-year-old stepbrother. What have people been saying about the relationship between Anna Kepner and this 16-year-old stepbrother who came into her life when her dad married his mom?
Well, Vinny, we've heard varying different stories from varying different people surrounding the relationship between Anna and this 16-year-old stepbrother, and we've heard from family members as well. And important to note and remember that this is a very blended family, so the dynamics could change depending on the perspective of who we're talking about.
Or is there someone else orchestrating this deadly mystery? Tonight, we dive into the Anna Kepner case, the evidence, the contradictions, and the shocking secrets that have kept Colorado on edge. Anna Kepner, 18, was last seen on the evening of November 6, 2025, in her cabin aboard the Carnival Horizon. Publicly reported statements from family members indicate she returned to the cabin saying she wasn't feeling well. She shared the room with her 16-year-old stepbrother and her younger sibling. Official reports confirmed that Anna's death later that night was classified as mechanical asphyxiation, but the timeline of her final movements remains murky. Investigators traced her last phone activity and attempted to reconstruct her interactions, while neighbors aboard the ship and cruise staff provided statements about her visible presence that evening. Phone records suggest Anna may have been in different parts of the ship than family statements imply. Neighbors reported seeing her outside the cabin at roughly the same time her phone pinged the Wi-Fi near the room. These conflicting accounts raise questions about who she was with in her final hours and why her movements are inconsistently reported. Adding to the uncertainty, her stepbrother's whereabouts are not publicly verified for that exact time. Could these discrepancies indicate that Anna left the cabin briefly, perhaps under duress, or might they simply reflect ordinary gaps in memory and observation? How do these differences in accounts influence our understanding of her final moments? Looking at similar cases aboard cruise ships, investigators often note that minor inconsistencies in witness statements frequently emerge in high-stress situations, especially when multiple family members are involved. The repeated discrepancy between reported sighting locations and phone activity establishes a pattern. The last known location of the victim is never entirely confirmed. In addition, the stepbrother was the only other minor in the cabin that night, meaning the room was shared with just two siblings, and access to the room would have been limited to family or staff with a keycard. This creates a recurring investigative question in this case. Who had access, and what interactions took place when no other adults were present? Based solely on verified facts, several possibilities could explain Anna's last moments. It is possible that she returned to the cabin and encountered someone inside who might have unintentionally or intentionally caused her death. It is likely that her movements outside the cabin were brief and routine, given the lack of forced entry or signs of struggle in common areas, but the conflict between statements and phone data raises the question of interaction with others. Another possible scenario is that stress, fatigue, or illness may have influenced her decision to move around the ship, leaving room for a minor accident or confrontation. Any theory must acknowledge that her stepbrother's exact presence and actions are unknown, and that the sequence of events can only be approximated based on the evidence available. Importantly, these are logical possibilities, not accusations, and they focus on reconstructing events rather than assigning guilt. What do you think? Could Anna have been moving around the ship on her own, or might someone in the cabin have been involved in a way that led to her death? Does the contradiction between phone records and witness statements suggest something more deliberate, or could it be the natural result of human error and imperfect memory? Comment below with your reasoning, focusing only on the facts and what they might imply about her last hours. By carefully following verified reports, we establish a foundation for understanding Anna's disappearance. The timeline is fragmented, witness accounts are inconsistent, and the sequence of interactions in the cabin is still unresolved. Yet even in the uncertainty, patterns emerge. Shared cabin, limited access, discrepancies between statements and phone data that allow investigators and viewers to start piecing together a coherent narrative. At this stage, Anna's stepbrother remains a figure of interest, but any suggestion of involvement is framed as a theory grounded in observable facts, not assumptions. The real question is not who did it, but what could have happened in those final unobserved hours. That question, layered with contradiction and pattern recognition, forms the core of the investigative hook for this chapter. After Anna Kepner's death, investigators conducted a formal interview with her 16-year-old stepbrother. Publicly reported filings indicate that during the interview, the teen attempted to recall events from the night of November 6, 2025, but acknowledged memory gaps and confusion about exact timelines. He recounted going to bed in the shared cabin and later discovering his sister unresponsive. Investigators documented his account, noting timestamps for his statements compared against known phone activity and cabin access logs. While no physical evidence has publicly linked him directly to the crime, his statements became part of the investigative record. When cross-referenced with cruise ship staff and phone location data, minor inconsistencies emerged. The stepbrother's account suggested he had been asleep at a certain hour, yet phone pings indicate activity near the cabin outside that window. Additionally, family statements suggest he might have been elsewhere briefly. These discrepancies do not prove wrongdoing, but they do highlight uncertainty in the timeline. Could these differences simply reflect a typical lapse in memory during a traumatic event? Or might they suggest that movements in the cabin were more complex than initially described? How do we reconcile these small inconsistencies with the absence of corroborated evidence? Reviewing similar cases of young adults providing statements after traumatic incidents, investigators often observe a pattern. Minor lapses or inconsistencies are common, especially when the individual is under stress, experiencing grief, or trying to reconstruct a confusing sequence of events. In Anna's case, the combination of teenage memory limitations, high-stress environment, and incomplete surveillance forms a recurring investigative pattern. The timeline is challenging to pin down, and minor inconsistencies alone cannot determine culpability. Based on these verified facts, several possibilities arise. It is possible that the stepbrother's account is accurate but incomplete, reflecting natural memory gaps rather than deception. It is likely that during the chaos of discovery, the teen may have unintentionally misremembered exact times or locations. Another logical possibility is that movement in and out of the cabin during that evening involved interactions or incidents that remain unrecorded, such as brief attempts to check on Anna, retrieve personal items, or respond to her illness. These possibilities do not assign guilt, rather they focus on reconstructing potential sequences of events in a legally safe manner. The teen's behavior, as reported, also raises another potential consideration: stress response. It is possible he experienced shock or trauma that affected both his memory and his subsequent recounting. Trauma can influence the way time and events are perceived, which aligns with the observed contradictions. Investigators must weigh these psychological and situational factors alongside tangible evidence rather than rely solely on inconsistencies. What do you think? Could memory lapses explain the minor contradictions in the stepbrother's account, or might there be another explanation for the timeline inconsistencies? How do these small discrepancies influence your understanding of that night? Comment with your perspective, focusing strictly on the facts and logical possibilities rather than assumptions about guilt. Even in the absence of conclusive evidence, the inconsistencies in timing, combined with natural patterns of memory distortion and stress response, allow investigators and the audience to explore what might have happened in Anna's final hours. This approach preserves legal safety while keeping viewers engaged, inviting them to consider multiple possibilities as the investigation unfolds. Investigators attempted to recover Anna Kepner's phone records and messaging history to reconstruct her final movements. Reports indicate that portions of her phone logs were missing or deleted, including calls and texts from the evening of November 6, 2025. Analysts also noted discrepancies between the stepbrother's timeline in his interview and the remaining phone data. Certain timestamps on the phone suggest activity that conflicts with statements he gave about his location and actions. These findings have been documented in court filings and form part of the ongoing investigation, though no direct evidence links anyone to intentional deletion or tampering. While the stepbrother claimed he was largely in the cabin during the evening, phone pings place activity outside the room at times he did not account for. Additionally, missing messages and deleted logs mean the reconstructed timeline is incomplete, raising questions about what might have occurred in those hours. The contradictions are minor in isolation, but together they create a pattern of uncertainty around movement and communication. Could the missing phone logs reflect routine technical issues, accidental deletions, or delayed syncing? Or might they indicate events or interactions that were not captured by statements alone? How much weight should investigators, and we as observers, give to these gaps in digital evidence when piecing together Anna's last hours? In cases involving sudden deaths aboard cruise ships or other semi-contained environments, investigators often see a recurring pattern. Digital evidence, such as phones or messages, may be partially unavailable due to deletion, technical malfunction, or delayed uploads. Combined with human memory gaps under stress, this often leads to incomplete but suggestive timelines rather than clear conclusions. In Anna's case, missing logs align with minor inconsistencies in the stepbrother's account, forming a pattern of gaps that cannot be ignored, but also cannot definitively implicate anyone. Based strictly on verified evidence, several possibilities could explain the missing phone data. It is possible that messages or call logs were deleted inadvertently, perhaps during routine device use or automatic cleaning functions. It is likely that gaps in data are a result of technical issues, such as lost signal, device malfunction, or automatic deletion, rather than deliberate concealment. Another logical possibility is that events in those hours involved rapid interactions that were not captured digitally, such as brief verbal exchanges or movement in the cabin, leaving no trace on the phone. Additionally, the remaining evidence might suggest sequence hypotheses. Anna could have been active outside the cabin, sending or receiving messages before returning to the room. The stepbrother, meanwhile, may have been present or absent at different times, but the lack of complete phone data means we can only theorize how their interactions might have unfolded, not assert what actually happened. This approach respects the uncertainty while allowing viewers to follow the investigation logically. What do you think? Could the missing or deleted phone records simply be a technical anomaly, or might they hint at interactions that we cannot fully reconstruct? How should we interpret the timeline when statements, pings, and logs do not fully align? Comment below with your observations, keeping your ideas focused on verified facts and logical possibilities. Even incomplete phone data can guide theory building. By examining contradictions, repeated gaps, and possible sequences, investigators and viewers can consider how the final hours might have unfolded. The key remains focusing on logical possibilities and evidence-based reasoning, inviting engagement while preserving a calm, investigative tone. When officers examined Anna Kepner's cabin aboard the Carnival Horizon, they noted several irregularities. Certain personal items were missing or displaced, including a jacket and a small backpack. Investigators also reported footprints that did not match Anna's known shoe sizes, found near the doorway and around the bed where Anna's body was discovered. Public filings indicate that while these anomalies were documented, there is no confirmed identification of who left these footprints. The stepbrother's whereabouts during these critical hours remain unclear, and he has not been formally linked to any of the physical evidence. Despite the documented discrepancies in the cabin, there was no sign of forced entry. The room was locked from the inside with the standard keycard system, suggesting that whoever entered had authorized access. This contrasts with the presence of unidentified footprints and missing items, creating a tension. Something seems out of place, yet no direct evidence indicates an intruder. Similarly, the stepbrother claims to have been asleep during the time these items went missing, yet the timing conflicts slightly with security and phone data. Could the cabin disturbances reflect normal movements of family members, or do they indicate an interaction we are not yet aware of? If no one else had access, how do we account for mismatched footprints and missing objects? What patterns can we detect that help reconstruct the final moments in the room? Reviewing patterns in similar investigations, crime scene inconsistencies often emerge when multiple people share a confined space. Missing items can be mislaid, or footprints may reflect brief movements not directly related to the incident. However, the combination of missing items, mismatched footprints, and unclear timelines forms a recurring investigative pattern. There is uncertainty about who was present and what occurred in those final hours. Such patterns demand careful analysis, but do not by themselves indicate criminal behavior. They instead establish areas for further questioning and observation. Based on verified facts, several possibilities could explain the crime scene conflicts. It is possible that the mismatched footprints belong to staff members, such as cleaning personnel, who entered briefly before or after the discovery of Anna's body. It is likely that the missing items were moved or inadvertently taken by someone handling the cabin for maintenance or emergency response. Another plausible scenario is that the stepbrother or another sibling briefly moved through the cabin, unintentionally displacing items while attending to the room. These theories focus on logical possibilities for how items could have been missing or footprints created, without assigning blame. Additionally, the combination of locked entry, displaced objects, and ambiguous footprints suggests that the room's state could reflect normal activity compounded by later discovery and handling. In other words, some contradictions may have been created after the fact through normal procedures, not intentional acts. Observing this pattern allows investigators to refine questions about movement and access while keeping conclusions grounded in evidence. What do you think? Could the missing items and footprints simply reflect normal activity, or do they hint at an interaction we do not yet understand? How should investigators weigh the presence of unexplained footprints in a controlled cabin environment? Comment below with your ideas, but focus strictly on what the facts might suggest rather than making assumptions about guilt. Even small details, like footprints or missing items, can suggest patterns or scenarios that help investigators reconstruct events. The key is balancing curiosity with careful reasoning, allowing viewers to follow the investigation closely without jumping to conclusions. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from public areas and hallways aboard the Carnival Horizon surrounding Anna Kepner's cabin. Portions of the footage are reportedly blurry or low resolution, yet some frames show a figure resembling the stepbrother moving near the area around the time Anna is believed to have returned to the cabin on the evening of November 6, 2025. Security timestamps on several clips are ambiguous or inconsistent, making it difficult to confirm precise entry and exit times. While the footage was considered in the official investigation, no definitive identification of the figure has been confirmed publicly, and investigators have not announced a link between the footage and the stepbrother. Although the figure appears to resemble the stepbrother, the blurry quality of the footage prevents certainty. Additionally, timestamps conflict with phone location pings and witness statements, creating a tension between digital observation, reported recollections, and physical evidence. The figure could be someone else entirely, such as a crew member, another passenger, or even a misidentified family member. This discrepancy adds ambiguity rather than clarity, leaving investigators and the public questioning the timeline. Could the figure truly be the stepbrother, or might it represent a completely unrelated individual? How do we reconcile conflicting timestamps, low-quality visuals, and witness statements when piecing together the sequence of events? How much weight should investigators give to inconclusive video evidence? In maritime investigations, especially aboard large cruise ships, blurry CCTV footage is a recurring challenge. Similar cases have shown that partial or unclear video can create false positives. Figures may appear to match a suspect's description, but turn out to be someone else upon closer inspection. When combined with ambiguous timestamps, the pattern suggests that surveillance evidence should be used to support other investigative findings, not serve as conclusive proof. In Anna's case, the footage aligns with prior observations of minor inconsistencies in the stepbrother's timeline, forming a repeated pattern. We have suggestive but not definitive visual data. Based on verified facts, several possibilities arise. It is possible that the figure in the footage is indeed the stepbrother, moving about the hall near his cabin at routine intervals. It is likely that someone else, crew, another family member, or a passenger, could have been captured at the same location and time, creating a misleading visual resemblance. Another logical scenario is that the timestamps are slightly offset due to technical error, meaning the figure's movements may not correspond exactly with Anna's last known activities. These possibilities allow us to consider sequence and motive without drawing conclusions. For instance, if the stepbrother was in the hallway, it could simply reflect normal movement between cabins or responding to a noise. If the figure was someone else, the visual match could have created false suspicion. The key is that the footage, while intriguing, cannot independently establish culpability. It does, however, highlight how investigative tools interact with uncertainty, forcing analysts to weigh every source carefully. What do you think? Could the blurry figure actually be the stepbrother, or is it more likely another person entirely? How should we interpret inconsistent timestamps and low-quality video when reconstructing events? Comment below with your observations, focusing only on evidence-based reasoning and logical possibilities, rather than assumptions about guilt. Even when footage is unclear, it can guide questions, highlight inconsistencies, and challenge timelines. This creates suspense while keeping the analysis grounded in verified facts, maintaining both investigative rigor and audience engagement. During the investigation into Anna Kepner's death, a neighbor aboard the Carnival Horizon initially provided a statement suggesting they observed the stepbrother near the cabin at the approximate time Anna was last seen. The statement appeared in early investigative filings and created initial attention around the timeline. However, in subsequent interviews, the same neighbor recanted parts of the statement, clarifying that poor lighting and distance may have caused misidentification. Investigators publicly acknowledged this recantation, noting that the credibility of the witness was complicated by environmental conditions and uncertainty in recollection. The initial statement implicated the stepbrother in proximity to Anna's cabin, while the recantation directly contradicts that observation. This inconsistency raises questions for investigators. Was the initial claim a genuine error in perception, or did stress and confusion influence the witness's account? The contradiction is significant because it alters how timelines are interpreted, yet it does not provide direct evidence linking the stepbrother to the incident. Could human perception errors explain the initial misidentification, or is there a possibility that key details were genuinely unclear to the witness at the time? How do we weigh contradictory eyewitness statements when reconstructing events in a high-stress, dimly lit environment? What does this shift tell us about the reliability of early reports in an ongoing investigation? A recurring pattern in investigative cases, particularly in confined or low-visibility settings like cruise ships, is that initial witness statements are often incomplete or inconsistent. Stress, distance, poor lighting, and brief exposure can lead to misperceptions that are later corrected. In Anna's case, the recantation aligns with other inconsistencies noted earlier in phone records, movement timelines, and partial CCTV footage. This pattern emphasizes a key principle. Early statements can raise questions but cannot be treated as definitive proof. Based strictly on verified facts, several possibilities emerge. It is possible that the witness genuinely misidentified the stepbrother due to poor lighting or distance. it is likely that stress and heightened emotional conditions, witnessing a young woman's sudden disappearance or discovering an emergency situation, impacted perception and memory. Another plausible scenario is that the neighbor may have seen someone else entirely near the cabin, creating an appearance of proximity that was later misremembered. These theories focus on logical possibilities for misperception rather than implying intent or action by any individual. The shift in the witness statement also highlights the importance of corroboration. When a statement contradicts earlier testimony or conflicts with objective evidence such as phone logs, timestamps, or CCTV, investigators must carefully weigh its value in reconstructing events, ensuring that conclusions are guided by verifiable facts rather than assumptions about guilt. What do you think? Could the initial witness misperception explain the contradiction, or might there be another reason for the shift in testimony? How much weight should investigators place on recanted statements when reconstructing events? Comment below with your thoughts, keeping ideas grounded in facts and evidence-based reasoning rather than assumptions about guilt. Even a single recanted statement can reshape the narrative, reminding viewers that investigations rely on patterns, corroboration, and critical evaluation, not first impressions. In this chapter, uncertainty grows, inviting the audience to participate in reasoned analysis, asking questions about perception, memory, and timing, and preparing them for subsequent developments in the case. Forensic analysis of Anna Kepner's clothing revealed fibers that did not match any of her known garments. Laboratory reports indicate that some fibers correspond to an unknown jacket, though the owner has not been identified. Additionally, investigators searched for fingerprints in and around the cabin, but no prints matching the stepbrother were found on key surfaces, including the bed frame, doorknob, and surrounding furniture. These findings are documented in official investigative filings and remain part of the forensic record. The absence of his prints does not confirm or eliminate involvement, but it does introduce a significant piece of evidence regarding physical interaction in the cabin. The stepbrother's timeline and initial interviews suggested he had been in the cabin at the time of the incident, yet the absence of his prints contradicts this account if one assumes routine movement would leave identifiable prints. At the same time, the presence of fibers from an unknown source complicates the narrative, as it indicates that someone or something else had contact with Anna or her belongings. These contradictions deepen uncertainty about who had physical proximity to Anna in her final hours. Could the lack of fingerprints simply result from natural conditions such as the smooth surfaces, cleaning protocols, or gloved hands? Do the unknown fibers indicate a third party's presence, or could they have been transferred indirectly through normal shipboard interactions? How should investigators interpret these forensic anomalies in reconstructing the events leading to Anna's death?
In similar cases, forensic fibers and prints often reveal subtle but critical patterns. Missing or absent prints do not always indicate absence. They may reflect environmental factors, clothing barriers, or intentional avoidance. Likewise, foreign fibers can appear through indirect contact, shared spaces, laundry handling, or casual movement across cabins. In Anna's case, the combination of foreign fibers and absent prints aligns with prior patterns of uncertainty, partial evidence that hints at additional movement or contact without confirming identity or action. This pattern emphasizes that forensic clues often raise questions more than they provide answers, but they remain essential for constructing logical scenarios. Based strictly on verified facts, several possibilities emerge. It is possible that the unknown fibers were transferred via indirect contact. Someone wearing the jacket may have passed close to Anna or handled objects without leaving fingerprints. It is likely that the absence of the stepbrother's prints reflects normal conditions rather than intentional avoidance. Many surfaces do not retain prints reliably. Another plausible scenario is that a third party had brief or incidental contact with Anna or her belongings, leaving fibers but not leaving prints detectable by investigators. These possibilities focus on logical explanations for the forensic findings, rather than assuming involvement or intent. Additionally, the combination of fibers and absent prints may indicate that movement around the cabin was limited, careful, or brief, raising further questions about timing and sequence of events.
The evidence challenges assumptions that physical proximity must always leave clear prints and reminds investigators and viewers that forensic clues require contextual interpretation, not immediate conclusions. What do you think? Do the foreign fibers suggest the presence of someone else, or could they have arrived through indirect or accidental contact? How should the absence of fingerprints be interpreted in understanding who was in the cabin and when? Comment below with your reasoning, keeping your ideas grounded in verified evidence and logical possibilities rather than assumptions. Even when evidence is incomplete or ambiguous, analyzing fibers and prints allows investigators and viewers to explore who may have been in contact with the victim and how, reinforcing careful, evidence-based reasoning while maintaining curiosity and engagement. Investigators examined the stepbrothers' claimed whereabouts on November 6, 2025, using a combination of receipts from the ship's gift shop and security footage from common areas. The receipts suggest he was in the atrium at times he initially stated he was in the cabin, while partial CCTV footage places a figure resembling him near corridors leading to Anna's cabin. These findings are part of official investigative records. Importantly, no evidence from these sources establishes a direct connection to the crime itself, and the stepbrother remains legally unlinked to Anna's death. The stepbrother's initial statement indicated he had remained in the cabin, yet security footage and receipt timestamps suggest he may have left temporarily. The discrepancy is small but significant. Movement outside the cabin contrasts with prior claims. This raises tension for investigators and viewers alike as the timeline becomes less straightforward, leaving questions about what he was doing, for how long, and whether these movements intersected with Anna's final hours. Could these contradictions reflect a simple lapse in memory or the natural imprecision of recalling routine movements under stress? Or might they indicate moments in which interactions, observed or unobserved, could have occurred? How should viewers interpret minor inconsistencies in alibis when direct evidence is absent? Reviewing cases where young individuals provide statements under stress, a familiar pattern emerges. Alibis often contain minor discrepancies. Receipts, video footage, or digital logs may not perfectly align with personal recollection, particularly in high-stress or chaotic environments. In Anna's case, the combination of receipt timestamps, blurred security footage, and interview statements forms a recurring investigative pattern. Slight inconsistencies that suggest movement occurred but do not inherently indicate wrongdoing. Investigators frequently encounter these patterns, emphasizing the importance of context and corroboration rather than relying on single pieces of evidence. Based strictly on verified evidence, several possibilities present themselves. It is possible that the stepbrother's recollection of timing was imprecise, a natural consequence of stress or cognitive lapse. It is likely that he moved through public areas briefly, either to retrieve items, check on family members, or attend to ordinary needs aboard the ship. Another plausible scenario is that a third party had brief or incidental contact with Anna or her belongings, leaving fibers but not leaving prints detectable by investigators. These possibilities focus on logical explanations for the forensic findings, rather than assuming intent or criminal action. The inconsistencies also highlight the challenge of aligning human memory with objective records. Receipts capture only purchases, security footage shows only brief glimpses, and statements rely on recollection, all imperfect measures of precise timelines. The resulting picture is one of uncertainty, not certainty, which investigators must navigate carefully. What do you think? Could these minor discrepancies in the stepbrother's alibi be explained by simple forgetfulness or stress, or might they hint at interactions we do not yet fully understand? How much should slight conflicts between statements, receipts, and security footage influence your interpretation of the timeline? Comment below with your reasoning, keeping your analysis grounded in evidence and logical possibilities, not assumptions. Even when evidence is incomplete or ambiguous, analyzing fibers and prints allows investigators and viewers to explore who may have been in contact with the victim and how, reinforcing careful, evidence-based reasoning while maintaining curiosity and engagement.
During a later phase of the investigation into Anna Kepner's death,
Previously overlooked materials were revisited. Investigators examined old notes and logs referencing an unidentified vehicle seen near the port where Anna's cabin was located, along with reports of possible witnesses who were not initially contacted. Documentation indicates that these leads were never fully pursued during early interviews, but their reemergence prompted a brief shift in investigative attention. While these leads raised questions about outside involvement, there has been no confirmed evidence connecting any third party to the crime. Despite the renewed focus, the stepbrother remained a central figure in the investigation due to proximity and prior timeline discrepancies. The resurfacing of these leads introduces a tension. Initial investigative reports largely focused on family members and cabin occupants, yet the presence of an unidentified vehicle suggests that someone outside the immediate circle might have been nearby. This conflicts with earlier assumptions that all movement and interactions were contained within family members or crew. However, no additional evidence confirms that this vehicle played a role, creating an unresolved contradiction between potential third-party presence and the lack of direct proof. Could the vehicle represent a coincidental presence, such as port staff or unrelated passengers, or does it hint at interactions that were previously overlooked? How should investigators weigh these new leads against established timelines and known evidence? How might these possibilities influence the reconstruction of Anna's final hours? In complex investigations, revisiting overlooked leads often uncover patterns that were previously hidden. Similar cases show that unidentified vehicles, fleeting witnesses, or minor environmental details can create temporary investigative shifts, prompting questions about timing, access, and opportunity. In Anna's case, the pattern emerges. Early investigative focus was narrow, yet evidence suggests broader context exists, even if it does not immediately connect to the main subject. These recurring patterns of ignored but potentially relevant leads underscore the importance of maintaining open-ended inquiry while prioritizing confirmed evidence. Based strictly on verified facts, several possibilities arise. It is possible that the vehicle and potential witnesses are unrelated to the incident, representing ordinary movement of staff or passengers near the port. It is likely that these leads, while intriguing, may have coincided with Anna's disappearance without influencing the outcome. Another plausible scenario is that the vehicle belonged to someone with legitimate access to the area, whose presence created incidental interaction that left no trace in forensic evidence. Importantly, the stepbrother's centrality in the investigation remains fact-based, tied to cabin proximity, timeline questions, and prior statements rather than these resurfaced leads. The resurfacing of previously ignored leads highlights an essential investigative principle. Evidence must always be interpreted in context. Even when new information emerges, it may not directly alter conclusions about the primary individuals involved. Instead, it creates a layered understanding of the environment, illustrating that multiple factors, timing, movement, and potential third parties can coexist without proving involvement. What do you think? Could the unidentified vehicle and previously overlooked witnesses be relevant to Anna's disappearance, or are they likely coincidental? How should investigators integrate these minor leads with established evidence? Comment below with your reasoning, focusing strictly on facts and logical possibilities rather than assumptions about guilt. Even small or previously ignored details can spark new questions, challenge assumptions, and encourage careful, methodical reasoning. The key remains: build theories on evidence, not speculation, and recognize that unresolved leads often deepen the mystery without creating new conclusions. During the digital forensic review, investigators recovered text messages sent by Anna Kepner in the days leading up to her disappearance. The content suggests she experienced fear or discomfort, often referencing unease around someone close to her. The messages do not explicitly name anyone, but investigators noted that the tone and wording imply a sense of urgency and apprehension. These messages were recovered from her personal devices and are part of the official evidence files, forming a documented trail of her state of mind before her death. While the messages indicate fear, they are non-specific, creating tension between what Anna felt and what can be objectively determined. The stepbrother has no confirmed direct connection to these messages, yet his proximity and prior inconsistencies in statements naturally lead investigators to consider whether he could have been involved. The contradiction lies in the emotional weight of the messages versus the absence of concrete forensic or testimonial links, leaving the timeline and context open to interpretation. Could these texts reflect general anxiety, fear of isolation, or interpersonal tension that had no connection to the later events? Or might they point towards interactions that were troubling, possibly involving someone close to her? How do we interpret fear expressed in unspecific messages when seeking to reconstruct the final days of a victim's life? In many investigations involving young adults, recovered messages often reveal heightened emotional states without providing direct evidence of external actions. Similar cases show a recurring pattern. Individuals report fear in text form about someone nearby, but forensic evidence, alibis, and physical data are necessary to determine whether the concern correlates with actual events. In Anna's situation, the pattern emerges of unspecific fear expressed digitally, combined with inconsistent timelines and minor contradictions, forming a cautious framework for theory building without assigning culpability. Based strictly on verified facts, several possibilities arise. It is possible that Anna's messages reflect ordinary anxiety, fear of isolation, or interpersonal tension that had no connection to the later events. Or might they point towards interactions that were troubling, possibly involving someone close to her? How do we interpret fear expressed in unspecific messages when seeking to reconstruct the final days of a victim's life? In many investigations involving young adults, recovered messages often reveal heightened emotional states without providing direct evidence of external actions. Similar cases show a recurring pattern. Individuals report fear in text form about someone nearby, but forensic evidence, alibis, and physical data are necessary to determine whether the concern correlates with actual events. In Anna's situation, the pattern emerges of unspecific fear expressed digitally, combined with inconsistent timelines and minor contradictions, forming a cautious framework for theory building without assigning culpability. These possibilities suggest that while the texts provide insight into Anna's emotional state, they cannot establish intent, proximity, or action. Investigators must interpret them alongside timelines, phone data, CCTV, and other corroborating evidence to explore whether the expressed fear aligns with observed events. This approach allows theory building rooted in evidence rather than speculation. What do you think? Could Anna's messages indicate general fear, or might they hint at a person close to her whose behavior caused concern? How should investigators interpret emotional communications when they are unspecific and uncorroborated by direct evidence? Comment below with your reasoning, keeping ideas focused on what the facts suggest rather than assumptions about guilt. Even unspecific texts can reveal underlying patterns of concern or distress, guiding investigators to examine timelines, relationships, and behavioral context. For viewers, these messages offer a glimpse into Anna's final days, building both curiosity and empathy while keeping all interpretations grounded in verifiable evidence. Official records show that the investigation into Anna Kepner's disappearance faced several procedural challenges. Warrants were delayed, some digital evidence was temporarily lost, and documentation errors were noted in logs and interviews. These missteps were acknowledged in investigative reports, though there is no indication that they were deliberate. Despite these challenges, suspicion regarding the stepbrother remained due to inconsistencies in his timeline, partially recovered phone records, and cabin-related evidence such as footprints and fibers. The procedural delays and errors create tension between the available evidence and the investigation's completeness. On one hand, investigative files contain fingerprints, CCTV, and message analysis. On the other, delayed warrants and lost evidence mean that some data could not be cross-verified in a timely manner. This contradiction complicates the ability to reconstruct events and verify alibis. While the stepbrother is a figure of ongoing interest, the procedural shortcomings prevent definitive conclusions. Could these missteps have affected the clarity of the timeline or the interpretation of forensic evidence? How do procedural errors influence the way investigators weigh inconsistencies, particularly when the primary suspect's movements are already under scrutiny? How should viewers interpret gaps or delays in documentation when evaluating the broader picture? In many complex cases, especially those involving high-profile disappearances, a pattern emerges. Procedural delays, lost evidence, or incomplete warrants are common obstacles. These challenges often create perceived contradictions in timelines and force investigators to rely on partial or circumstantial data. In Anna's case, repeated issues with warrants, coupled with lost or delayed phone data, aligned with prior inconsistencies seen in timelines, messages, and CCTV footage. This pattern underscores that uncertainty in evidence often stems from procedural gaps rather than direct involvement in any individual. Based strictly on verified facts, several possibilities exist. It is possible that the delayed warrants and lost evidence created gaps that now appear suspicious, even though they may have been routine procedural errors. It is likely that investigators' ability to reconstruct Anna's final hours was hindered by these delays, which in turn may amplify minor inconsistencies in statements or movement logs. Another plausible scenario is that certain evidence, while initially misplaced or incomplete, might later corroborate timelines or clarify movements once properly analyzed. These theories focus on logical possibilities arising from procedural issues, rather than suggesting intent or culpability on the part of any individual, including the stepbrother. Additionally, procedural errors highlight the importance of corroborating multiple forms of evidence. When one type of evidence is delayed or lost, investigators must rely more heavily on other data points such as phone logs, CCTV, witness statements, and forensic findings to identify patterns and construct plausible sequences of events. This multi-layered approach is crucial in maintaining analytical rigor despite gaps in documentation. What do you think? Could these missteps have unintentionally influenced how investigators viewed the stepbrother, or do you think the evidence remains robust despite procedural gaps? How should delays, lost evidence, or errors affect our interpretation of the case? Comment below with your reasoning, keeping ideas focused on what the facts suggest rather than assumptions about guilt. Even unspecific texts can reveal underlying patterns of concern or distress, guiding investigators to examine timelines, relationships, and behavioral context. For viewers, these messages offer a glimpse into Anna's final days, building both curiosity and empathy while keeping all interpretations grounded in verifiable evidence. Official records show that the investigation into Anna Kepner's disappearance faced several procedural challenges. Warrants were delayed, some digital evidence was temporarily lost, and documentation errors were noted in logs and interviews. These missteps were acknowledged in investigative reports, though there is no indication that they were deliberate. Despite these challenges, suspicion regarding the stepbrother remained due to inconsistencies in his timeline, partially recovered phone records, and cabin-related evidence such as footprints and fibers. The procedural delays and errors create tension between the available evidence and the investigation's completeness. On one hand, investigative files contain fingerprints, CCTV, and message analysis. On the other, delayed warrants and lost evidence mean that some data could not be cross-verified in a timely manner. This contradiction complicates the ability to reconstruct events and verify alibis. While the stepbrother is a figure of ongoing interest, the procedural shortcomings prevent definitive conclusions. Could these missteps have unintentionally influenced how investigators viewed the stepbrother, or do you think the evidence remains robust despite procedural gaps? How should delays, lost evidence, or errors affect our interpretation of the case? Comment below with your reasoning, keeping ideas focused on what the facts suggest rather than assumptions about guilt. Even when missteps occur, evidence-based reasoning allows investigators and viewers to focus on logical possibilities, sequence reconstruction, and contextual analysis, maintaining suspense and curiosity without assuming guilt. This chapter highlights how procedural challenges amplify investigative uncertainty, keeping audiences engaged and thinking critically about the case. Months of investigation into Anna Kepner's disappearance and death have yielded extensive documentation, forensic analysis, CCTV footage, phone logs, witness statements, and recovered messages. Despite this, no charges have been filed and the case remains legally unresolved. The stepbrother continues to be a figure of scrutiny, largely due to his proximity, timeline inconsistencies, and prior investigative attention. Public reports confirm that investigators are still evaluating all leads, including previously overlooked evidence, but as of now, no definitive link between him and the incident has been established. The contradiction lies in the tension between suspicion and legal closure. While circumstantial evidence, inconsistent statements, and proximity may suggest a focus on the stepbrother, the absence of forensic confirmation, reliable witness testimony, or conclusive digital evidence leaves investigators and the public with questions rather than answers. The case is emotionally charged because the apparent patterns point toward a familiar individual, yet legally that person remains uninvolved until proven otherwise. Could the unresolved status of the case reflect gaps in evidence, the complexity of maritime investigations, or coincidental alignment of circumstances? How should investigators, and by extension the public, interpret a scenario where suspicion persists but legal confirmation is absent? What does this tell us about the limits of both forensic science and eyewitness accounts in high-pressure cases?
A recurring pattern emerges in investigations where circumstantial evidence dominates. Strong suspicion can exist alongside incomplete proof. In similar cases, timelines may appear inconsistent, minor forensic anomalies may be present, and witness perceptions may shift, all creating a landscape of plausible but unconfirmed scenarios. In Anna's case, patterns of minor inconsistencies, procedural gaps, previously ignored leads, and unspecific messages collectively suggest possibilities without establishing certainty. This reinforces the principle that suspicion is not synonymous with guilt, and unresolved cases require careful, measured analysis. Based strictly on verified facts, multiple possibilities exist. It is possible that the stepbrother's proximity and prior inconsistencies reflect ordinary movements rather than direct involvement. It is likely that some evidence remains incomplete or inconclusive, such as blurred CCTV, missing digital data, or forensic anomalies, which could leave investigators unable to make definitive conclusions. Another plausible scenario is that an unknown third party could have interacted with Anna or her belongings, contributing to inconsistencies in footprints, fibers, or timing without leaving traceable evidence. These theories emphasize logical possibilities grounded in fact rather than assumption, highlighting the complexity of reconstructing events when data is partial. This unresolved status also illustrates a broader investigative reality. Even extensive, months-long inquiries cannot always produce closure when evidence is ambiguous, procedural missteps occur, or key moments remain uncorroborated. It demonstrates that careful reasoning, pattern analysis, and theory building must coexist with restraint, avoiding premature conclusions. What do you think? Given the unresolved nature of the case, do the patterns suggest the stepbrother might have had a role, or do they point toward uncertainty that could involve unknown factors? How do you interpret months of investigation with no charges, despite persistent scrutiny? Comment below with your thoughts, focusing on evidence-based reasoning and logical possibilities rather than speculation or assumption. Even without closure, analyzing evidence, patterns, and theories encourages critical thinking and engagement.
It reminds viewers that investigations are about process, methodical reasoning, and factual interpretation, not instant answers. The unresolved status keeps the mystery alive, inviting careful observation and discussion while preserving analytical integrity. Months of investigation yielded evidence, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions. Suspicion around the stepbrother persists, yet no legal charges exist. Could the gaps reflect procedural limits, unknown third parties, or timing coincidences? Across all chapters, we see recurring inconsistencies, timelines, statements, and forensic clues that suggest possibilities without confirmation. It is possible the stepbrother's presence explains some anomalies, or likely that unknown factors played a role. What do you think? Share your theories in the comments and join us in analyzing the mystery further.